Welcome, everyone. I am Peter Freer. I am founder and CEO of Play Attention and of Freer Logic. And we'll be talking about enhancing cognitive control through neurotechnology today. And we are really grateful that everyone is here. Obviously it's a chaotic time, and we really appreciate your attendance. And I'm eager to learn with you today as we go through the PowerPoint. It's rather an exciting field. I've been involved for over 30 years. So one of the things I think we can do that'll help each other out before we start the webinar is for you to either turn off your cell phone or your tablet or your TV or mute it so that you can tune in to what we'll be talking about today. All right, we're here for a reason, and it's to learn, and that will be the basis for the webinar. Now, when we're talking about neurotechnology, understand, as I mentioned, I've been in this for 30 years, and I have trained folks using neurotechnology, U.S. Olympic bobsled and luge, nuclear power operators. As a matter of fact, I'm co-author of a white paper on human performance with the International Atomic Energy Agency of the United Nations. NASA astronauts and pilots, NASCAR pit crews, Da Vinci robotic surgeons. As you're probably aware, with Play Attention, I've trained many thousands of individuals with ADHD. We've also trained people with TBI, traumatic brain injury. As a matter of fact, just briefly, I'll note that I have been an instructor in martial arts for probably about 50 years or so. Some of my students went into the UFC, and one of them has incurred brain damage from his days in the fighting championship. Martial arts, some of you may know what that is. And it's come full circle back to me, and we are now training his cognitive control using neurotechnology. And that's how profound this is. So I hope everyone's kind of aware of what we do, who we have trained for many years, and the fact that we're using the same concepts, the same precepts, the same algorithms in the Play Attention system. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about the mind and what it is, and then how the mind and body are connected, because both of these are incredibly related to cognitive control. Then we'll discuss what neurotechnology is, because many of us here have seen the term, but we really don't understand it, or we don't know what it is. And then we'll put the whole puzzle together at the end, and we'll talk about neurotechnology and developing cognitive control. So I'd like to talk about the mind and the brain. And philosophically, for many centuries, there has been discussion about one exists without the other. Does the mind exist without the brain? And the brain obviously needs the mind to function well, or the mind could be even seen as a byproduct of what happens in the brain. But I'm not here to really opine on the philosophical aspect. What I'd like to do is talk about how they work together, and how working together either will produce good cognitive control or can actually impede cognitive control. And when you see this the hippocampus or the amygdala regions of the brain, and you're looking now at a portion of the brain here that, that is a specific region, but the mind does not reside in any specific region in the brain. A lot of talk about prefrontal cortex and how it has certain features of cognitive control, executive function, and so forth. But realistically, the whole brain works together, right? This is a curious feature, but certain regions of the brain are responsible for particular activities in the brain, but indeed they are all interconnected. They're all connected to other networks, excuse me, to other networks and they all work together. So the mind does not exist in any one particular region of the brain. All of the parts seem to work together and are interconnected. If you want to explore this more, we could do a webinar on the brain function, and how this affects cognitive control. That would be a whole webinar to itself. Be delighted to do that for you. If you're interested in that, just type in brain and brain function, and I'd be delighted to talk to you, because it is an exciting field, and it also illuminates us, if we look at it, into the incredible potential of the human brain. One of the most profound things I've ever learned in studying neuroscience, neurotechnology, and this is particularly important, is that when we're looking at the starry sky, the evening sky, and we are pondering what's going on, if we look at that and we look at every full moon, every sunset, every kiss, everything we ever learned at school, everything that we are, have been, we've experienced, we've had come through our sensory inputs, right? Our five senses. And you can think of that kind of like the mouse I'm using to control the PowerPoint. That's an input into the computer. Our senses are the input sources for our computer, our massive control center called the brain. So everything gets reduced down to this. The brain is comprised of billions of cells, between 80 and 90 billion cells in the brain. That's an enormous computer tucked into a small amount of space. And then these cells, called neurons, talk to each other. So they communicate information between each other. And this little transmission of information creates a small electrical field between the neurons. And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail. But the profound thing here is that everything we've ever seen, done, felt, tasted, smelled, touched, heard, everything is reduced to this: the random firing of neurons in the brain. That's our universe. That's our inner universe. Without this, we don't exist. With this, we are who we are. That's profound. And I want to go into that in a little bit more detail as we move forward. What exactly is the mind then, and how does it work, right? How will that work? And we'll get into that in more detail here. So as we just said, the brain is an organ of reduction. Everything gets reduced down to the random firing of neurons. Now, all of those experiences hardwire your consciousness, right? And this is another profound statement. It may sound silly, but let's say our consciousness is its content. That's kind of like telling you a glass of water is a glass of water because it has water in it. But our consciousness is its content. Everything that we have experienced, everything we've been trained to do, trained to understand from any perspective, is part of our consciousness. As we just saw in the prior slide with that little infant, right? Everything that she's taking in forms who she is. If she's growing up in the United States, there is a high probability she'll speak the English language. Now, if she grew up in China, she would be speaking Chinese most likely. All of that is how we perceive the world. And our consciousness actually forms what the way our mind actually operates. Sometimes we've experienced negative things in our life, right? And many of you may have a friend, or perhaps it's you, that has experienced something very negative. And it actually changes the architecture in our brain. It changes the wiring. So our experiences hardwire our consciousness. The more that we experience something, the more it gets embedded. It's kind of like a river. The older rivers are very deep, sometimes very wide, and the channels get deeper the more they age. And the same thing happens with the thought processes and what our training is in our brain. The more often we experience it, the deeper that channel gets, the more it is hardwired in. Now, the brain is a very, very powerful tool. 20% of the energy we expend in a day is used by the brain. This little 2 or 3 pound organ uses over 20% of our total energy during the day. And when you're asleep, the brain isn't really asleep. The brain is more active at night, or just as active as it is in the daytime when you're asleep. And there's a reason for it. The brain is an organ not only of reduction, but it tries to make sense of the world. In other words, it tries to produce order for us. Obviously, we don't function well when there is disorder in our lives, right? We perceive that as stress. When there is order in our lives, then we are less stressed. And the brain tries to put things in order for us at night. When we sleep, it tries to change our memories from short-term to long-term memory, right? There are many features that the brain does while we're asleep, many, many things that it does while we're asleep. And that helps hardwire who we are. It does not want to do everything all at once, because it would be incredibly taxing to do that. So some things are left on kind of an automated system, right? The automated system we call our autonomic nervous system. So some things the brain doesn't have to keep constant monitoring on, and to give a communication for the heart to beat every second. It's done through a nervous system that is pretty much on its own, right? It doesn't have to tell our eye to open and close the pupil, to broaden when it's dark and then shrink a little bit when the light is too bright. That is left up to our autonomic nervous system. But it just tells you that the brain is an incredible processor, but it leaves some features to other systems within that still have a direct relationship to the brain, but are on a little bit more of an automatic system. Now, all of this is important to understand if we're going to understand the idea of cognitive control. But before we get there, we need to understand this huge connection, as I started with, between mind and body. All right. The mind really controls what happens in the body, and the body starts to control what happens to our emotions, and the emotions affect our behavior. And there really should be a huge circle all the way back from behavior back to mind, because our behaviors definitely influence the way our mind works. So when we talk about the mind, let's say I have a lot of negativity in my life, or I think negative thoughts all the time. If this happens, then I could have troubled thought. I could have nonstop, incessant thought. And with a pandemic among us, job losses, and having to get new jobs, and having children at home to educate, working from home, all of these new things may have produced some negativity in you. And you may have had this incessant, nonstop chatter in your mind. Even when you're going to sleep, you can hear things in your brain and you can't get them to turn off, and that affects your body. So maybe you have an upset stomach far more than you've ever done. Maybe you have even gotten a rash now from this, right? There should be something called the pandemic rash that people can get, because that happens due to the stress the body responds. And perhaps your sleep has been affected. Can anyone here relate to that? If you can I get a hands up so that we can see who and if you've been affected by this? Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I understand. That's the majority of us here. So there's this definite connection between mind and body. But if the body is not in good repair, or it's having problems sleeping, then that affects our emotions. We have a shorter trigger to getting angry. I start to doubt myself and what I can do. I can even become withdrawn from family and my friends. And if that happens, then my behavior is affected. I may start binge eating, or I may just get a loss of appetite, depending on how I respond internally. And of course, if I'm drinking too much or if I'm smoking too much, which affected my behavior, and my emotions affect my behavior, so I start drinking or smoking more than I ever have, some people get driven to drug use. That behavior affects the way my mind functions. And I can't tell you how drastic this is. And some of you will relate to what I'm about to say. I had a dear friend who had a lot of negative thoughts, and it followed this pattern. He started getting stomach issues. He would have fatigue, headaches all the time. He began to be sad, withdrawn, and it affected his behavior. And he started drinking and smoking much more. And then, since that would not calm it, he began drug use. And the drug use affected his mind even more. And there was no communicating with him after that. And it was very sad. And it affected his mind so much he could not actually comprehend the world. He would tell me he had seen things that were so real to him that I couldn't say, hey, you haven't seen that. I had to say, I understand that your brain thinks it has seen that, but could you, and this is what I begged of him, could you possibly see my way that perhaps the drugs that you're using had affected the way that your brain perceived the world? And the fellow committed suicide. It's very, very sad. Very sad. And there's nothing I could do to intervene, although I tried. When it happens in his mind, and you can see the cycle, it's very difficult to manage. And it's very difficult to watch your friends do that. Do I have anyone here that understands exactly what I'm saying? And you've had friends in the same situation or similar situation. You can give me a hand raise on that as well. Well, yes. And again, the vast majority of us here are seeing this kind of thing happen. So you know there is a huge connection between the way that we're hardwired and that when we learn, and the way our brain functions and how it relates to the body and our behavior and this whole cycle. And this is very important to understanding cognitive control. All right. Cognitive control begins and ends in the brain, and it refers to our ability to actually manage the brain, our innate ability to manage the brain. So when we are in a webinar, when I'm in this webinar and I ask for hands raised, I get feedback, and I understand whether you're able to follow me, whether what I'm telling you resonates. And so I can process that information. And if it's not resonating, I'll augment my behavior. I'll change my behavior so I can present differently or take it from an angle that would make more sense to you. All right. That involves creativity and problem solving and task switching and decision making on my behalf. That's good cognitive control. Right. The alternative would be me just panicking. Now, this sounds funny, right? I could just sit here and remain very rigid, and that's the alternative to cognitive control. But many of you here, let's say that you have to get up and do public speaking. How many people here find that your cognitive control in public speaking is very bad, and that you would rather run and hide in a closet than get up and publicly speak? Hand raised on that. That's amazing. It is amazing. Wow, that again is a very, very high number. But that is cognitive, that's part of cognitive control. Now, if you are the parent of an ADHD child, if you are involved with a significant other who has ADHD, if you are a teacher that has students who are ADHD, if you are a professional that sees students with ADHD, you know that cognitive control is very difficult. The ability to pay enough attention to start is very difficult. Their attention is diffused. They have a lot of it, It's just diffused and is not easily focused on one thing unless it's incredibly stimulating, right? So that makes it hard for them to process the incoming information, right? And then do they augment their behavior very well? Or do they fly off the handle? Or do they do things that are just totally bizarre or not appropriate, overly emotional, just not appropriate for the time? And then they have problems. Since they have that, they have problems in problem solving and task switching. If you are familiar with this, please raise your hand. That is the majority of us again. So this is all the related to what cognitive control is in the brain. It's part of executive function and being able to self-regulate. Right? Now, all of us experience poor cognitive control at different times. If you are stressed, personally stressed, or under distress, anxious, then you may experience poor cognitive control. We make poor decisions. When we're stressed, nobody really makes good decisions. The people who make good decisions are those who, under duress, can remain calm. And that was part of my training that I talked about initially when we're working with Olympic athletes or Da Vinci robotic surgeons or NASA pilots, those kinds of things. They have to be able to stay in a peak state, whether it's boring, what we call hypoarousal, or whether it's really exciting and stressful, which we call hyperarousal. So that was one of the things that we use neurotechnology to train them to do. Stay in the moment, peak performance, in a relaxed state when you're bored, or whether you've got a lot of problems going on in the spacecraft, right, or in a jet. We still have to remain in a focused state. Obviously, if we're all flying together, let's say that we've boarded a jet together, we're flying to Europe right now. We want our pilot, even if something goes wrong in the cockpit. How many people here want the pilot to remain calm and problem solve? I do. Anybody else here? All right, that's right. We really need cognitive control, even when times are bad and when we are all stressed. So when we do have impairments, and we all experience them at different times, they could be deficits in attention, memory, language comprehension, and emotional processing. And for language comprehension, we go, how could you have a deficit in language comprehension? Well, how many people here have an ADHD child, and the ADHD child, you will say, hey, I need you to go to your bedroom, put your pajamas on, brush your teeth, and get ready for bed. Yet you come up to the bedroom in half an hour later, and they're sitting on the edge of the bed. They made it to the bedroom. They heard that part, but they didn't process brush your teeth, put your pajamas on, get ready for bed. They didn't process any of that. Anyone here experience that? That's a language comprehension problem. And that's cognitive control. Or perhaps you're with your child, an ADHD child or significant other, and they have come to you with an emotional, off the wall inability to understand, comprehend, and really have an emotional outburst. Some of you probably have recognized that, right? This is all part of weak cognitive control and something we want to improve. Now, what affects that? What can actually affect cognitive control? As I mentioned earlier, drug use can be a significant factor in the weak cognitive control or deficit in cognitive control. Anxiety and stress can affect our ability to function well, have good cognitive control. Neurodevelopmental disorders such as ADHD, depression, schizophrenia, and so forth can affect the way that our brain processes information. and has, good cognitive control. So the question is then, is it possible to improve, to enhance cognitive control, or are we just hardwired, right? Are we not able to do this, or is it we're stuck? And the answer is there is a way to improve cognitive control. Now, this is one way, and I think is probably the best way for all humans at this point. You can learn cognitive control through mindfulness. How many people here understand mindfulness training and have tried mindfulness training? Again, a great number of us here have. Now, when you do mindfulness training and you start, breathing and following your breath, and then about a minute into it, you start thinking about what you're having for dinner. I'm thinking about what bills I have to pay and who I'm meeting tomorrow. And then I catch it, I go, oh, I have to start being mindful again. So then I start the breathing process all over again. How many people find it's extraordinarily difficult to be mindful for a very long period of time? And that too is true for most of us here. Absolutely. Because the brain has a difficult time training itself because we can't peer into the brain to see what's going on in real time. And that is one of the secrets of neurotechnology. Neurotechnology is really what we call a neuromonitor. It allows us to look at brain function, so it gives us control over our brains. And that is very, very important. Why is it important, you should ask, right? Remember, as we said, the brain is comprised of billions of neurons, and the neurons have to talk to each other in order to talk, because they're not continuous. They actually are separated by a little gap. That is called a synaptic cleft. So if I want to talk to the cell next to me, I have to fire a neurotransmitter into that synaptic cleft to talk to the neuron next to it. All right. The neurons do this by themselves. When you have one, it emits a little tiny piece of electrochemical energy. When you have hundreds of thousands to millions of them firing at one time, it creates a whole field of energy. That's called volume conduction. Volume conduction. All of that energy in the brain creates an electromagnetic field. Now, we thought the electromagnetic field in the brain, and I'm going to talk a little bit technical, but I'll keep it simple. And if at any time you have questions, save them for the end, and then I will do my best to address your questions at the very end. So when these cells talk to each other, they fire those neurotransmitters. Almost everyone here, I'm certain, has heard of a neurotransmitter. That's the little electrochemical pulse delivered from cell to cell that makes your brain fire correctly. And if those are not communicating correctly, then your brain's not firing correctly. Now that creates an electromagnetic field. Now, we used to think that the electromagnetic field was an epiphenomenon. In other words, it happened because of something else. For example, you have an engine in your car. When you turn that on, the engine has a little hum to it because there are moving parts in between it. That is what is known as an epiphenomenon, right? We're not worried. The main purpose of the engine is not to have a hum. The main purpose of the engine is to turn wheels so that we can move. But an epiphenomenon is the hum. So we used to think that that brain wave was just an epiphenomenon, didn't have any real meaning to it. What we have now discovered, I actually theorized that we had an electromagnetic field, that it was oscillating across the brain. And that was one of the ways that I actually developed some new neurotechnology, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they have now not only verified that that happens in various scientific papers that have been released, they now know that that field that wanders, oscillates across the surface of the cortex, actually imparts information to other parts of the brain. So it's not just the cells whispering to each other, it is actually the field they create that delivers information to other areas of the brain. And this is incredibly important to our understanding of how cognitive function works in the brain and how the brain actually communicates holistically rather than just through the series of networks. Now, these electromagnetic fields produce waves. Right here, you see a picture of what brain waves actually look like. And these brain waves are parsed, for our work in the field, they are parsed into bandwidths. Now, to understand bandwidth, how many people here are old enough to remember when we could punch a number on our radio or turn a dial and it would change our FM or AM stations? Anybody here old enough to remember that? A few of us. Okay. Remember when we could turn the knob and go to FM 105.4 and we'd listen to that radio station? Or I could turn the knob and go to FM 107, FM 109. Those are different bandwidths. And that involves, just for the science end, how fast the frequency is traveling or how slow it is traveling. So you can see when we look at delta, the green wave there, it is kind of long and spread out. So that's very low frequency, 1 to 4 hertz. And you go to theta, and theta is a little bit faster. You can see the waves are closer, the peaks are more closely arranged, and then alpha is even more closely arranged. And each one of these wavelengths tells us about what's happening in the brain. And that's what a neuromonitor, neurotechnology actually does. It looks at all of these waves that are caused by brain cell activity, right? The neuronal activity, imparting information to other cells in the brain. But they tell us a lot. So if your delta is dominant, we know you're asleep. If your theta is very high, we know you're in the twilight of sleep. If alpha is dominant, then we know that you're relaxed and alert. If beta is very high, then we know that you're processing information. And so we can see these things happening in real time. Now, I know this doesn't make a lot of sense to you just now, but I'll connect it for you here as we move forward. So these are brain waves. And those are, again, those are the summation of all the activity between the neurons in the brain firing and producing an electromagnetic field. Now, current generation neurotechnology is pretty cool. You can wear sensors on your head in a clinical setting. Many of you have probably seen this set up on TV, and you have these headsets that look like this, kind of a sleek design, and you have the science fiction design over here, right? The problem with using these is that they're rather intimidating, and the public has rejected them for about the last 30 years. No one has anyone here seen anyone wearing this in the mall, or when we used to go to malls? Are you seeing them wearing these in the grocery store? No. Yeah, that doesn't happen because they're rather invasive. They make us look a little bit odd. So that was one of the reasons I developed alternatives to this. And you can see here, we're working on the wristband form factor. We should have that out in a year or two. But we already have an armband form factor, and you'll see that a little bit later, that picks up neurosignal through the body, because we all have worn an armband at one point or the other. Some of us still get on the treadmill and we have our phone and our armband on our side so we can listen to our tunes and our earbuds. I also have created this headrest right here. You can see, if anyone can see my cursor. And this, I'm working with many European, American, and Japanese automakers right now. This will be in cars in the next couple of years, where it just reads your brain. Now, nothing is emitted into the brain with this. Think of it like a microphone. A microphone doesn't emit anything into your voice box. It just sits patiently and waits for you to speak into the microphone, right? So that when you're talking, it can take the waves coming out of your mouth, and then it can transfer those to an electronic speaker where you can actually hear them and amplify them. That's pretty much what neurotechnology does. It looks at the brain data coming out of one's head, especially This contactless one, you can see there's distance between the human head and this neurotechnology right here. You don't even know it's there, yet it can tell you when you're too drowsy to drive. It can tell you when you're cognitively overloaded. Perhaps you're trying to text and drive, and you're going to kill someone. And it can tell you not to do that. It can tell you that you're not paying attention, you're distracted, and many, many other things. So this we're working on in Freer Logic with many automakers right now, and even some airlines. The other one, the body-based one that we discussed up here, which is an armband right now, we'll turn it over to a wristband form factor in the next couple of years, is basically used for our Play Attention program right now and training astronauts, pilots, and that kind of thing. So what benefit do we have to listening to our brain? Well, if it's discrete, we can practice anywhere, anytime, and train ourselves to develop better cognitive control. And I'll go into this in more detail. It provides a real-time feedback loop, so you can practice more consistently. And I'll tell you more about this as we go forward. You can practice more precisely. You can be in the state that you want longer, and it shortens your learning curve drastically. So these bandwidths, as I've mentioned, tell us the state that you're in. And here she has a very high delta, right? It's dominant. And so she's falling asleep. And we can actually see that when we're using a neuromonitor. We can also see when you're not paying attention, you're distracted. We can also see how much cognitive stress you have, whether you're getting fatigued and so forth. All of that can be told to us through the types of neuromonitoring. Now, these are the important ones. We have passive monitoring, active monitoring, and interactive monitoring. And the one that we'll want to focus on today pretty much is going to be interactive monitoring again. I'll talk to you about that in a sec. Let's take a look at our basic feedback device almost all of us have in the bathroom of our home. Everyone recognize this? Right? Pretty simple. So we step on this and it gives us feedback about our body weight. It gives my brain feedback. So it's not a neuro feedback tool because obviously we're not getting information about the brain, but it does give us information about our body, right? So with that being said, when I step on it, I get feedback. And it is a passive tool at that point, right? And let me go back to that. It's a passive monitor. So if I step on it though, and I have a Snickers bar in my hand, and I see that my weight is way too high, and I throw the Snickers bar across the room, well, then it becomes an active monitor, right? Because I am now disgusted with my weight. I don't need the Snickers bar. This thing is telling me you're too fat, stop this. And I am actively monitoring my weight, and it causes a change to my behavior. What we do want to talk is about, what I want to discuss primarily, though, is interactive monitoring. What the heck is interactive monitoring? This is the cool part of neurotechnology, the really cool part of it. Interactive monitoring and cognitive control are related. So when I set up Play Attention years ago in the early 90s, I discovered that if I gave people skills to learn, like, for example, being on task, time on task. This is a problem for people that have weak cognitive control. I can start, how many people here know of someone, or perhaps you're one of those people that can start 50 tasks and finish none of them? Anybody know a person like that, or this is you and that's why you're here? Again, vast majority of us responding affirmatively. So with that being said, what if I gave you a task? This is actually, this picture here, you can see is a forklift driver and a truck. And if you look to the left, you'll see the edge of some crates there. This is a game that we call time on task that we use to teach time on task. Because if we want to learn cognitive control, someone has to teach our brain, or something has to teach our brain how to develop that particular skill set. So I want to learn time on task. So I give you a series of crates on the screen. Now, when you engage, fully attend to the fellow in the forklift, you can drive the forklift over by mind alone. This is through the neurotechnology, right? The neurotechnology is looking for you to be in an actively engaged state. And when you are hitting that state, there's the interaction. It will help you drive that forklift, no mouse, mind alone, over and grab a crate and then drive it over and stack it on the truck. Because this is what we're doing, is learning to start this task. My task is to grab the crates and stack them on the truck and then drive the truck off all by my mind alone. This is all in real time. Your mind is the mouse or joystick. So we're using neurotechnology to train you to do a specific cognitive control task. Everybody with me? Is it too abstract, or are we understanding what we're doing with the neuro monitors now? We are actually looking at the ability of the brain to respond in real time. And so it's the first time in our lives that attention has become concrete and controllable. It's real. It's not something I have to think, oh, I'm paying attention. I think I'm paying attention. And then I start thinking about something else. It makes attention concrete and controllable. So this is the first aspect. And then this is all done through interactive neurotechnology. So this is why we can train faster. This is why the nuclear power operators, the Da Vinci robotic surgeons, NASA, NASCAR, Olympians have decided this is a great way to do it, because it gives us the ability to look at the brain's response in real time and train the brain to do the things we need it to do. Otherwise, we're left to our own devices, like trying to meditate on our own or trying to be mindful on our own. If someone or some technology does not tell us when we lose it, then we waste an extraordinary amount of time trying to figure out and actually control and perfect what we're trying to do in the brain. Have I lost anyone? Remember, if you have questions, save them. I will answer them to make certain we're all on the same page. Okay, so that being said, this is just one element of how we use interactive neurotechnology to produce better cognitive control. Let's talk about another way that we do it. When we're using it, this is the armband I was talking about previously. It's called the Bodywave Armband. You can see the logo down there. It's the one we use in play attention. It goes on his arm, has to touch his skin. And then he controls games on the screen in play attention. This is used the way we use it in play attention, that teach him cognitive control, time on task, better attention, short-term memory, working memory, spatial memory. And I can even have him work on his homework, his real homework, while he gets feedback, auditory feedback from the monitor, the performance monitor, we call academic bridge. And it says, Jimmy, you are not paying enough attention. Focus in on your homework. Because it can see that. Jimmy cannot. Mom and dad standing over him cannot. But the neurotechnology can. Does everyone see the significance in using neurotechnology like that now? The fact that we can see that in real time. The fact that we can get them to control it in real time. These are the incredibly important elements behind interactive neurotechnology. Now, what I did in play attention as well is not only allow him to drive things by attention alone, his mind alone, but I wanted to challenge all students when they use this, because one of the things we know about training and people with poor cognitive control is that if we just let them do this on their own without any challenge, and it doesn't really push them to the edge of their abilities, then we don't get the results we need. You don't get better unless there is some challenge in the program. So what we do is when they get good at it, we will raise the bar just a little bit and say, can you engage more? And if they meet that, they just keep playing. If they can't meet it, it's too difficult, then the game will immediately click back to their last best state of attention and engagement. And then it will challenge them a bit later. Because if I do not challenge you, and this is one of the things I lectured on at the United Nations in Vienna, in order for the human brain to rewire, then I have to get challenged. I have to break what I already know and move past it, and that is done through challenge. And the challenge is delivered, if you can see this last statement just above my head, it's through deliberate practice. That means they have the feedback, they have the engagement, they have the challenge, and they have these little mini skills that they're trying to achieve constantly through challenging operations in the program, so that we can ensure long-term permanent change, rewiring the brain. And I see Margaret is asking if we can talk about this with emotional engagement. All of that is embedded in here. Let me talk to you a little bit about that. When you are working with an ADHD child or an adult or a client, you'll find very quickly that when they're going through this, their states of frustration and how they handle that are part of poor cognitive control, right? We know that they'll have an outburst. And when we teach them that it's okay that you're not successful right now, we set a little margin for the next time. We say, you know what, next time, let's just try it this much. We'll just set a little mini goal. And then we give them something that's reachable. And we also reward them for decreasing their emotional outbursts. Because one of the great things that we see when they have an emotional outburst, when they're using this, is an immediate effect on attention. So I may be trying to move, if I go back a slide so you can see this again, so we have a common reference. Let's say I'm trying to move the forklift driver, get him to put the crate on the truck. Like, I can't do this. This is hard. It's hard. And as his coach, I said, it is hard. It's hard for all of us. A couple of deep breaths. Let's focus back in. And I get him redirected. He focuses back in and he gets it to move again. So what did we just learn there? Great many things. Number one, we have a direct relationship to, I can't do this. This is so hard, to my attention completely failing. The thing stops, doesn't move. And I'm like, oh, I'm not focusing. You're redirecting me. You need to focus in and take a couple of deep breaths and it will move. I focus in, a couple of deep breaths. It's moving again. I'm focused on it. And I have this direct relationship between emotional outbursts, right? Poor cognitive control, and what the heck that does to me and my attention. And what, at that point, as his coach, I go, do you do that in the classroom a bit? Oh yeah, it drives me crazy. I can't do this, you know. I said, but what happens when you take a couple of deep breaths and you control that? What happens? Well, I'm able to do it. So then we start to teach them how to transfer and generalize that to the classroom. Right? And we do, Sarah said, do you coach remotely? We do coach remotely. You can get play attention and you can get your own private coach with it. Yes, we do that remotely. They can see you. It operates just like the Zoom. It's very, very close to Zoom. We've been doing that for years. So you can see that we can solve the problems of attention, emotional outbursts, being able to make good decisions, because all of the practice in here really involves all of the cognitive skill sets. There are so many different games, from social skills to auditory processing challenges. All of the things I talked about, they're built into play attention. And someone here just asked, how does this work for adults? It works the same way, right? You can even hire your own personal play attention coach, or you can do it on your own, but we'll help you every step of the way. One of the great things is, even if you don't have the online coach, and this is Marla who said, this is, yeah, I understand, Marla. It is, or Maria, excuse me, it's Maria. Maria, it is so hard to do it on your own. And so when it is too hard, we will jump in and help. So you can get your own coach if you want one, or you always get support. It's free. It's built in. The online coaching is not free. You'd have to pay for an online coach. They have to make money as well as when they're training you. But in Play Attention, you always have, if you want to fall back and go, hey, I really need to talk to somebody there about how I'm training. You can call and talk to your coach. You can send an email to your coach. You can send a text to your coach. There is incredible support built in. So here's another way that we work, and this is just an attention program in Play Attention. This right here, you can see, and then there's one, it's an ocean view, and I'm going to show you the next slide as well on that too, because it'll show you a little bit bigger picture. So when I engage the dolphin with my mind alone, my goal is to pay attention. This is called attention stamina. I need to pay attention for longer periods of time. So I engage the dolphin, I push it down to the bottom of the ocean, I hold it there. And then there's a little treasure chest you can see off my shoulder. When I'm close to that treasure chest, I can actually pull gold coins out with a dolphin. But the idea here is to control my attention in real time. And this gives me instant feedback. When I control it, I'm able to make it swim down. If I go, oh, I can't, I can't do it, it's hard. And then I see it goes all the way up. And as his coach, I go, a few deep breaths, focus back in, and then it'll go. And then they do that. And they see that relationship between what it takes internally to do it. Again, remember me saying attention is now concrete and controllable? That's what this does here, and just in this one. But then again, it's the basis for training every cognitive skill set we need to increase cognitive control, decrease outbursts so that we're self-regulating internally without mom and dad. Eventually, he doesn't need, let me just give you a great example of that. Many of you have talked to Gwen, who's the acting operations officer at Play Attention. Gwen had the most fantastic experience when she was using this as a public educator in North Carolina city school systems. She had a 6-year-old student at the time, and it was a young girl. The little girl would come in, and if Gwen had left anything on the computer where she would watch the screen and move the characters around, that little girl would have it in her hand, and while she's trying to pay attention, she'd be fidgeting with her in her hand. And so Gwen thought the best way to stop this was just to remove everything from the computer. So the little girl came in a little bit early for her next lesson. And she saw Gwen moving everything away from the computer. And she played very well that day. But when she came for her next lesson, she knew what Gwen was doing. She brought in a pack of crayons and she put it right up under the monitor, and she looked at Gwen and she said, I'm going to play today and I'm not going to touch those crayons. Now, this was profound because that child understood what Gwen was doing. She knew that all these things distracted the child. The child saw her taking away the distractions and knew that it was a detriment to her. So she came in and set her own goals. And that she did. She did not touch the crayons while she played because she knew, she saw on screen when she started fidgeting with those things, the character went the wrong way. Now, how profound is that? Is everybody with me? That is an amazing sense of building cognitive control internally. And we gave her the environment to do it. This is another way we teach mindfulness. All right. We have a game called Lotus that you get in Play Attention. Now, Lotus is a closed lotus flower, And on the screen, when you become engaged to the Lotus, you become mindful, then you can open the Lotus pedal by pedal. If you're on a pedal and you lose your mindfulness, the pedal closes right in front of you. And then you know, I'm not being mindful. I'll pay more attention. I'll become more mindful. And then that pedal opens. This is neurotechnology giving us a look at our brains in real time. And this is incredibly powerful because now we can train with it really easily, discreetly, in a fun way, and improve our cognitive control. Lotus is a great way to learn mindfulness. For all those people here that at the very beginning and said, oh, you know, I tried mindfulness and it worked for about 2 minutes and I just drift off. I can't do it. Now you're able to do it in real time, having fun and learning far more quickly and training for that will last you a lifetime. This is for relaxation. This is called Sleepy Beach. So I put a sun high up in the sky that you can see the beach lapping up on the shore. What I want to do is I'll just kind of lean back, take some deep breaths, and just engage with the sun, but very relaxed. More relaxed I am, the better it will work. And I can make the sun set. Now, if I get fidgety or I'm hyper or I'm anxious, the sun will go back up in the sky. So I'm, again, the neurotechnology is actually training my brain to stay in this really relaxed state. When I make the sunset, the sky will change to stars and darkness, and then I can raise the moon. All of that is controlled by the brain's ability to be relaxed. Now, what has the research shown? Tufts University School of Medicine did a study on play attention against just brain training games that you can buy all over the internet. And then they got a group that had a non-intervention intervention group. We improved executive function, attention, behavioral control, and ours did not require an increase in medication or were off medication. Now in brain games, they got no increase in any of that. And the non-intervention group got no increase in any of that. As a matter of fact, both groups, the non-intervention and the brain games group, required an average increase of 9 milligrams of Ritalin to stay in school. How significant is that? Incredibly important. Can Neurotech make you smarter? There have been numerous studies that say that it can raise your IQ. What happens, I think, is the fact that you are so much more engaged, so much more in control of your cognitive control, that things that were once difficult for you become much easier. If you look at the letters that we receive, and that's under our resource page, I believe, where you can look at people who have used it and their letters that they've written to us, you'll see what I'm talking about. And they talk about recovering from a stroke or how it changed their lives. You'll actually see it. So in summary, the benefits, increasing our attention, all of these things relate to cognitive control. Increasing our attention, being able to meditate when we need to, relaxation, understanding cognitive load and how it affects us, how I can move to a peak performance state, being mindful, controlling my emotions. I'm even working now on sleep and distraction. You see my goldfish friend here? This talks about all of us, speaks to all of us. Microsoft did a study almost 8 years ago, checking out the average attention span of human beings. They found that the average human being had a 7 to 8 second attention span. The average human being has a 7 to 8 second attention span. A goldfish has a 9-second attention span. So is this important to all of us? Yes, I'm going to repeat that. Microsoft's study found that the average attention span of the average human being was 7 to 8 seconds. They found that a goldfish has a 9-second attention span. It does not bode well for us if we continue on that trajectory. Next steps, if you're interested in using play attention as I've described here, you can start your play attention. Just type in your phone number, someone will call you about it. We do have assessment packages. I'll talk about that a little bit more. The assessment packages include an assessment on focus, on how much you can attend, even under duress, under distractions, those kinds of things. And it gives you an actual place to start, where you actually start compared to your peers. The other assessment tool is the brief, which is an index of executive function. So what we use those for, if you take that and we look at where you stand in executive function, or your student stands, or your client or your child, your spouse stand in executive function, then we can custom tailor the Play Attention program. If you would like to register for an assessment package, type in assessment package, and we'd be delighted to contact you or register you for the package. You can also get a one-to-one consultation. These are free consultation. Someone will talk to you about how to do it, that kind of thing, and how to use Play Attention effectively. And of course, the next webinar will be how Play Attention actually works, a little bit more detail than what I've given you today. So that'll be coming up next. And that's the next webinar. I believe that's next week. So if you want that, just say webinar and they'll register you for that as well. So again, the assessment package is very important because it helps us customize Play Attention. And even if you don't use Play Attention, the assessment package will tell you where you stand in the world today, as far as where your focus is, where your executive function lies. Thanks so much. Everyone have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.